Do you find yourself needing to integrate Salesforce with external applications? Have you needed your users to authenticate before accessing external applications? Susannah St-Germain will show us tips for setting up connected apps with security protocols. Welcome! It's Rachel and Jessica from 100 Days at Trailhead, the place where the tech community comes to learn Salesforce, learn tech, get inspired, have fun, and invest in ourselves. Whether you are brand new to learning Salesforce and starting from the beginning, or mid-career and skilling up for that new opportunity, we are your trail guides here to support you with an itinerary to help you get where you're going. You are in the right place. If you are new to our channel, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to click on the notification bell so you can be notified when we release a new video. In the description below, you can find links on everything we mention in this video, in addition to links we find helpful like books that have helped us and our friends along our tech and Salesforce journeys. To find other helpful Salesforce and tech content, visit our blog at 100daysoftrailhead.com. In this video, Susannah St-Germain discusses how to set up connected apps. Susannah is a Colombian-American technical architect at Oauth, an ISV that provides data protection, privacy, and operations for some of Salesforce's largest customers. She is actively involved in the Salesforce community as co-lead of the Boston Admins user group, director of Ladies Be Architect, and Rad Women Code coach. Susannah is a Salesforce MVP, Golden Hitty recipient, and is 21 times Salesforce certified. Your quest, should you choose to take it, is to journey with us through the adventure of learning Salesforce connected apps. Your quest begins now.
Susannah St-Germain.
Hey, thank you guys. That's so sweet. I'll do an informal intro and then we'll get into the formal presentation. But I did just want to say too that WitDevs was one of the first community groups in the Salesforce ecosystem that I really felt at home with. Like I had gone to a bunch of in-person meetings and like Wit groups and different groups, and I just never really felt the connection until I heard about. I don't even remember how I heard about this group, but I went, and Jessica, you and Rachel are just so welcoming to everyone, and I really, really felt that connection. So thank you so much for that and for this group, and I think it really means a lot to a lot of people. So thank you. And with that, let me figure out my screen sharing situation here. Can you guys see the slides?
Yeah, we see the slides right now.
Cool. Okay, I'll go into presentation mode. And okay, so good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us for this meeting on connected apps. For those of you who don't know, my name is Susannah St-Germain. I am a 19 times certified architect. I'm a technical architect in my full-time day job, but I am not. So I'm a certified person and I am a technical architect, but I am not a CTA yet. That's something that I am pursuing in sort of I'd say maybe a year-ish future is probably my current timeline for that, but it is something I'm pursuing. I am also the co-leader for Ladies Be Architects, which is another awesome community group that you might have heard of. And I do a couple of other things in the community as well, here locally in Boston and with Rad Women Code. It was just another awesome community group, virtual community group in the ecosystem. And if you don't follow me yet on Twitter, I hope that you give me a shout there. That's where I'm the most active. If you try to link me on LinkedIn, I apologize in advance. I am very, very bad at that. So please look out for me on Twitter. And if you want to read some of my exam tips and all that good stuff, that's my blog right there. But without further ado, let me go ahead and get into sort of the meat of this presentation. So tonight we're going to be talking about connected apps, and we're not going to have a ton of slides. This is like a very demo heavy session, so definitely bear with me during that. But I'm super passionate about this topic. It's a little it sounds a little dry, right? Like I think a lot of us, especially admins who have done some work with Salesforce, are probably familiar with connected apps, maybe in terms of a managed package that you install from the App Exchange, and you can like see it and see the who developed it, and maybe see a couple other things. But there's a whole lot of other really cool stuff that is possible with connected apps that's more geared towards developers and even architects. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and not just talk about it, we're going to look at it inside Salesforce. So as a just standard definition, this is taken from Trailhead, but a connected app is a framework that enables external applications to integrate with Salesforce. And that integration piece is really key, because we're going to talk a lot about how to use connected apps to integrate with other systems in Salesforce, because that's where they really shine. And that's sort of why when you install an installed package, a lot of times they come with a connected app, because it allows the developer of the connected app to know certain things about how you're interacting with it, and for you to control how your users can interact with that app. So I am going to just take a pause. Things good with sound, things good with video. Are you taking a picture? Okay, cool. Just wanted to check. So let's dive into some of the use cases for connected apps. There's two main use cases, and once I understood this better, it made more sense to me why there's certain things in certain places in Salesforce. Because you might, if you were like me and you had worked a little bit with them, you might have been annoyed that like, oh, I have to go to this area to like view my connected app, and this area to manage it, and I could never remember which place to go. But once I sort of read about the theory behind how Salesforce imagined using people, or how Salesforce imagined people using connected apps, it made more sense. So from a sort of Salesforce architecture perspective, there are two different purposes, there are two different users of connected apps, or consumers that they envision. And one of those is the connected app admin. And that's the person who maybe installs that managed package and blocks certain apps from being allowed to be integrated with the Salesforce org. And it's also that same person who can configure policies and say, well, only people with certain types of profiles can use this particular app. So that's the connected app admin. And then on the other side, there's a connected app developer. And this is a person that actually is building integrations either with maybe a custom mobile app or a custom web app, or even someone that's building APIs that will connect to Salesforce. And they actually use connected apps too. They actually use them to get pieces of information that are required for the two systems that they're integrating to trust each other and to talk to each other. So we're going to look at a little bit of both of these use cases tonight, going from sort of most, or I guess least complex to most complex. So we're going to start with the use case that we're probably more familiar with, which is managing access to third-party applications. So that's like that admin side of the connected app. And then we're going to go and get more complex and more complex. So we'll talk about the managed package sort of use case. We'll talk about the use case for accessing data from Salesforce if you're someone who's developing a custom app that lives outside the Salesforce ecosystem, like a custom mobile app or web app. And then we'll talk about how you can use connected apps to enable you to call into other systems, to do things like single sign-on with Salesforce into other systems like Google. And then we will finally, hopefully we have time, talk about the most complicated connected app use case, which when I read the sort of like write up on it on Trailhead, I was like, I'm like reading these words, this does not make any sense to me. So I went through it and sort of built it out for myself to understand it better. So we'll talk about that too. Cool. So, and feel free to interrupt me, unmute yourself. I don't see the chat, so if you have a burning question or if the sound goes out, please unmute yourself and yell at me. So the first use case, okay. So the first use case is going to be managing access to third-party apps. So, you know, anytime you install something off of the App Exchange, or sometimes when you don't even install something, but you access a web app like Workbench, connected apps start to come into play. So we're gonna hop out of these slides because this is not, like I said, this is not a very slide heavy discussion we're having tonight. And I'm just gonna drag this over here. And is this big enough? Can you guys see, or do you want me to zoom in? Okay.
We're good. Cool. And we'll watch the chat if somebody, puts a question in there, but we encourage people to just ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Just ask, interrupt me. It's fine. This is informal. I'm trying to figure out how to get this like annoying thing off my screen, but that's fine. Okay, cool. So first use case, the managed package, or the non-managed package, because I think that's the more interesting one. You'll probably be familiar with the fact that, or if you're not, we'll walk through it. Connected apps live in the app manager if you're in Lightning. And you'll see them alongside all of your other apps, sort of in this long list. You can filter them, but you'll see some connected apps here. These are managed ones, and we'll go into why they say that in a second. And then there's also the ability, if you're a developer, to create a new connected app and set it up. But one thing that I found really interesting when I first started learning more about this was the fact that this is what Salesforce uses too, to create some of the magic between like the Salesforce mobile app and Trailhead. So if you've ever logged into Trailhead, or if you're using a Trailhead playground, like this is the Trailhead playground, you'll notice, if you go in here, you'll notice that Trailhead and that the Salesforce mobile app are actually in here as connected apps. Because that's how Salesforce creates that trust between the custom applications that they're creating outside of your Salesforce org and the Salesforce org itself. So as an example, our first example, we're going to take a look at the connected apps that are connected to this particular org here. So you'll notice that I have, ignore this, we're gonna use this in a later demo, but you'll notice that there's Trailhead, right? So I can see that I have logged into Trailhead with my credentials, and that I can do things like block whoever logged into Trailhead with the credentials to this org, and even manage some policies around them. I can, if I pop this open, I can see, okay, it was who first authenticated or essentially like logged in with this org's credentials. I can also see when they last used it and sort of kick them out and revoke them. And I'm going to show you sort of like from soup to nuts how to do that with a new application. So if we flip back to my list of what's called authenticated apps, or apps that are connected to this particular org, you'll see that I don't have Workbench in here. And Workbench is a very common, right, a common app, web app that a lot of admins or developers use. So I'm going to show you what happens when we actually connect Workbench to this particular org and what that connected app looks like. So I'm going to go to Workbench. And I'll just go to this one, developerforce.com. So I have Workbench. This is an app that lives outside the Salesforce ecosystem, right? This is an app that I'm accessing on my browser. And the first time I connect it to a new org, I'm going to choose that I'm connecting to production, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to click Login with Salesforce. And what this does, the first time I ever do it, with my credentials, it's going to say, do you really want to access Workbench and share certain things with Workbench, like access to your basic information? We're not going to get into, because this could be a whole nother presentation around what this actually is and exactly what it does. We're going to touch bits and pieces, but this is for anyone studying for the Identity and Access Manager certification. This is Oauth, right? This is a protocol or a framework called open authorization that lets you establish trust between different systems. So here we're establishing trust between Workbench and Salesforce. A little bit of an aside. But so I'm going to click allow. I'm going to say, yep, I want to use Workbench with my Salesforce org, and boom, I'm in Workbench. I am logged in. If I hover over here, I'm logged in with the org that I was in on the other tab. So I'm going to flip back over here. And now if I refresh my page, you will see that there is going to be a new connected app that was magically added. So I can see that Workbench is now a connected app that was generated in my Salesforce org. And if I wanted to go look at it and manage some of the policies, like maybe I only want people with a Salesforce system admin profile to be able to use Workbench. I don't want everyone to be able to do it. I can change who's permitted to use Workbench. And I can do lots of other fancy things, like say, I only want people to access Workbench when they are at a certain IP address. I don't want them to be able to access it from home for some reason. So this is control that you have as an admin or a developer, an architect, over apps that your users are authenticating their Salesforce credentials with. So that's that admin access side of a connected app. And for those of who've maybe never seen a connected app before, I'll just do like a super quick overview of like all the different pieces. We'll touch more in depth in all the different demos, but it's essentially when you click new connected app, you give it a name. You set certain policies, like who can access it and things like that. And then there's tons of other things that you can do with it, and that's what makes it like really a little bit complicated, but also a really powerful framework that's just sitting inside your Salesforce platform, sort of waiting for you to use. So that's our first sort of simple, this is maybe an admin use case for working with connected apps. Know that you have this power to sort of control who can use different apps with your Salesforce org. Okay, so that's our first use case. Moving on to our second one. So this one, we're now going to be moving from sort of that admin perspective to the connected app developer, someone who's going to be developing integrations with Salesforce. So the most common use case for this, a connected app has to be set up anytime someone's trying to access your Salesforce information from outside of Salesforce. The most common thing that you'll see is if it's a custom mobile app that someone developed, or even a web app that someone developed, and they need, for whatever reason, certain pieces of information out of your Salesforce system. And the only way for another system, or even for someone outside of logging into Salesforce, the only way for them to get information out is via the different Salesforce APIs. So let's take a look at how that might work if I had a custom mobile app. Okay, and here's where I'm going to get out my demo notes. So bear with me for a second. Okay. So in this scenario that we're talking about, we have a developer that is trying to create a new Salesforce data integration via the APIs. So we're gonna, for the very first time, create our own connected app from scratch. So we're gonna go to the app manager, and it says there's only 9 minutes and 54 seconds left in the meeting. Are they lying?
If for whatever reason that happens, we will just reconnect. Worst case scenario, I'll repost a link to Zoom on WitDevs. I'm terribly sorry.
Twitter.
On Twitter. So it's at WitDevs. I created a case with Zoom, and I created a case with Salesforce because for whatever reason my license got disconnected. So I apologize to everybody. So bear with us.
Well, we'll go for now.
Sounds good. We'll keep going for now. So let's create our first connected app together. So I am going to give it a fun name. Let's see, WitDevs, create WitDevs mobile app. Maybe we have a brand new mobile app for people to communicate with WitDevs community groups with, and they want to go in and query information outside of their Salesforce org to display to their members in this really fancy mobile app. So the first step to creating that integration is to create this connected app, and I can name it whatever I want. Doesn't really have much of a consequence, but I also need to give them my email address in case someone needs to contact me about this custom mobile app that I wrote, and I am now installing and having people authenticate into. I also can do something kind of fun, and this is, I don't know, it's like creating tabs when you have to choose the icon. That's like the hardest part. I can create a fun little icon for my app that I'm going to create. Let's see, I want to do a heart. Let's do a star because we are, see? So I'm just going to grab this purple star and you'll see where it comes in. Again, it's like tabs. You don't really need to pick a fun icon, but I can't resist. Okay. So I have my fun icons, and then I can put a description if I want, best practice, right? With devs API demo. Okay, cool. So I have my connected app that I'm building out, and the thing that I'm going to do with my connected app is allow it to interact with that external app via Oauth. So we talked a little bit about Oauth. That's that pop-up that comes up and says, hey, do you really want to give this system that's not Salesforce pieces of your Salesforce information? So I have enabled my Oauth settings because I want to use Oauth to communicate back and forth with those two systems. And then I have to put in something called a callback URL. This is essentially just a piece of information that gets passed between the two systems so that if for some reason that other system were to be compromised, someone can't go in and say, hey, actually don't send your information back to that other system that you trusted. Send it back to me, this malicious hacker. And Salesforce doesn't allow that. So it says, no, when you authorize, tell us where you want us to send it, and we're going to send it to that place no matter what. So for us, for our demo, we are going to be creating our fancy app via this really cool thing that if you haven't checked out before, you definitely should. And it's called, I'm just going to pull it over here, the Salesforce OpenID Connect Playground. So if you are studying or playing around with creating different integrations, this is a very cool place to test out the way you request and get information from Salesforce into a web app. So I am going to, this is our sort of we're faking a little bit, spinning up a brand new application. But I'm going to use this framework to show you the requests and the responses that connected apps help us generate. So in this playground, which I'll link in the slides, it tells us, it says, okay, well, make sure that when you're setting up this connection that you send back this information to this particular app that we are playing with. So the callback URL is openidconnect.herokuapp.com. So I say, okay, thanks, application. I will use that information and tell it to Salesforce so it knows where to send the information back to. So I'm just going to type that in. And you'll see this pattern of the external system giving us pieces of information and us giving the external system pieces of information in the rest of the demos. That's a pretty common pattern. That's how the two systems establish trust. So we've got our nice little callback URL. The idea of scopes, again, something we won't go too far into, but what it does is it allows you to define in your Salesforce org how much information you're willing to share with that other application. Because that's the whole point of like going through all this setup and using a connected app instead of just saying, hey, external system, here's my username and password. Because if you were to do that, then you have no control over how much information you want that external application to get. So I'm going to go down here and say, okay, well, I am integrating with a web app. So I know that I need to give the web app scope. I need to provide my access to this data via the web. That's how it's happening. The others.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt really quick. I'm pasting a URL in case we get disconnected.
Okay. Oh, good.
Here. So everybody, please copy that now and just put it in a nice little safe place. And
when we get cut off in
if and when, I don't know. I mean, is it going to boot us? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. No, thank you. I'm copying and pasting myself. Okay. Cool. So we're providing our scopes. They're saying, what we're allowing this fictional external app to have access to. When you're going to be working with Salesforce data, there's a pretty standard set of scopes that you have to provide in order to create that connection. And there's the demo that this first demo that I'm going through is on, most of it's in a Trailhead project. So I'll also provide a link to that. So if you're like totally, feeling overwhelmed, there are step-by-step instructions so you can do this as well. So you'll have a list of all the scopes that are required, but typically it's web, API, because we're going to be getting information via the API, and then OpenID Connect, because that's the mechanism we're using to connect to authenticate our user into our fictional mobile app. Let's see, require secret for web server flow. Yes, I will be using that. So we can leave everything else as is. So I am going to, do we need to do anything here? Oh no, so I'll go into that in our next demo. So I've filled out everything I need to do. It says allow 2 to 10 minutes. I find that usually things are ready much faster than that. Oh, cannot be, I have to do HTTPS. Because again, this is all about the whole point of doing all this crazy stuff for an integration is for security, to have control over the security and control over the access. Okay, cool. So I have my fancy new connected app for our WIT devs, and it's actually a web app. This is a bad example, but I'm going to fix it. Will this matter? No, I'll just fix it. Let's see, this is a good question. I don't know if it'll probably make my demo very confusing because I think the API name will stay the same, but let's see. Yeah, okay, well, we'll live with it. So I have my fancy connected app, I have my nice icon, and then I have 2 really, really important pieces of information that were generated by Salesforce. So I have this idea of a consumer key. This is like my username that we're going to share with the web application that we trust. And then I also have another piece of information, which is very, very sensitive. That is the consumer secret. And that is like the, maybe I'll zoom out. That is like the password that we're going to provide and ask the external application to store and encrypt for us. So we have these, this is sort of like the end game for a lot of creating connected apps, is this consumer key and consumer secret. So you'll see that in the other 2 demos as well. Less than a minute. Let's see if it happens. Okay, so we have consumer key, consumer secret, then really that is all that we need in order to hand over. So we got our consumer key, we got our consumer secret, and that's really all that we need to get to start working with our web app. We could have done things like on the admin side, like said, hey, only provide access to certain people. We could have gotten fancy with that, but we actually don't care about that right now. Because we're a developer, we have our developer hat on. So I am going to go to this super nifty playground that is going to serve as our fictional web app. And I'm going to do a couple things. So I am going to, this is the login host. I could put in my domain. I don't necessarily need to, but for now, I'll just leave it as login.salesforce.com. And then I am going to switch the screens so I can copy and paste. So I'm going to copy my username, aka consumer secret or client ID. You'll see it called that sometimes too. It depends on which side of the relationship you are. Right now, we're in Salesforce. We're creating it for the consumer. Right now, on the other side, in this little fictional mobile app, we're the client. That's why the term changes. I'm just copying and pasting my consumer secret, aka my password or client secret. Okay. And then this redirect URI, this is the thing, right, that Salesforce passes, and we make sure that it's sent, we know where the data is being sent after we get it. Okay, so I have put in all of my secret information, and now I'm going to click next. And what's happening in this app that's sort of like mocking it up is it's making a call to a specific endpoint, so a specific API. But this app makes it that so we don't have to type it in. We'll see it in a later demo.
So,
So
Susannah, I've got a quick question.
oh,
So
please,
in
yeah.
that login area, you put login.salesforce.com. If I'm using my
Yep.
domain, then I put in my domain. And then if I'm using like an enterprise, OAuth, validation and authentication.
So if you're using SSO, so if you're using single sign-on, you would still use you could use login.salesforce.com or your my domain. You would still use that. So this org does have a domain on a my domain on, but at the end of the day, the issuer is still login.salesforce.com. The only time it would be different is if it's if you're working with a sandbox, and then it would be test.salesforce.com.
Right. I know you can disable the login.salesforce.com. Do you know if you disable it, do you still log in that way, or does it fail, or you might not know?
It should still succeed. That turning it off is just turning off that. That's a good question, actually. We could try it, and maybe if we have time afterwards. But
sorry, I'm not trying to throw monkey wrenches. I'm just
no. It's an interesting question. I would think that would succeed still, because most people use the login.salesforce.com in this
doesn't.
flow.
I think
it doesn't.
failed.
I had an org where we turned it off and we had to turn it back on.
That's it. Okay, interesting. Good question. So I'm going to go ahead and allow. So this is where I'm providing that authorization to my Salesforce org from my web app, right? So I'm going to allow it, and I am going to get back from the API some information. And this is why I really like this playground, because it provides some transparency on what's happening. So it shows the calls that we're making. So this is if we were doing this by hand, like if we were actually coding it, this is the request that was sent. So you can see like this was the endpoint that we used, and the client ID that I copied and pasted into like the nice fields. This is the actual request that would get populated if you were doing it by hand. And then this is the response that we got back. So we got back a response with a callback. So we got a response to our callback URL. It was essentially redirected back with a code. And this code, if you're studying for the Identity and Access Management Designer exam, this code is the authorization code that we're going to get in order to request a second layer of a second code called an access token that we can then get information out of our Salesforce org with. So this is sort of that first step in the two-step process. So if I'm a developer, I've got that authorization code because I created the connected app, awesome. And then I'm going to use that authorization code to request an access token. And this nifty little playground sort of mocks it up for us. So I see that I'm now fetching my identity. So previously I was exchanging my access token. That was the step that we did previously. So I can see again that it was successful, that I got a response back with even more information. My response now has down here, if you look starting on line 19, I am getting an access token. And this is the thing that I ultimately need to use to request data out of Salesforce. I can see that I got my access token, and there are different attributes that come along with an access token. And those are down here. So you can see that there, let's see, so I can see my access token. I can see where it was issued from. I can see what scopes. So remember when we set up the scopes in the connected app, like web and API and OpenID, I can see that, yep, this is what I am requesting. I'm requesting to get this level of permission, essentially. And I can see what type of token it is. There are different types of tokens, but essentially we get all the metadata about this access token that we've gotten back. And then at the end of the day, we use that access token to then request information. So in our fictional scenario, I can see that I have now used my access token successfully up here. This was the request I sent. And I got back information about myself. I got information about my user, and that was the endpoint that was used in this call. So just through creating that connected app, I got essentially the credentials in order to query any sort of information I would need to out of the Salesforce org into my custom mobile app. So that's demo number 1. That's a lot. Let's do a time check, 8:38. Okay, so that's the sort of first level of working with connected apps in a developer sense. I'm going to move on, and continue to interrupt me, please. I'm going to move on with our third scenario. And this one is, maybe it sort of ties in nicely, Rachel, with what you were asking. So there's, OAuth, which typically creates trust and allows for easier access and logging in without username and password for system-to-system communication. So with Workbench, I needed to access, or with Workbench, I wanted to get information from Salesforce, right, to work with it. In our custom web app, I needed to get information out from Salesforce. So it was that web app and Salesforce that were establishing that trusted relationship without passwords. And with single sign-on, it's the user that's actually trying to access the system without typing in yet another password and sharing that information. So our third use case is using connected apps to integrate a service provider. So I know we're going over like lots of really complicated terms, but essentially the thumbnail sketch of what a service provider is and why you should care is that Salesforce can act as what's called an identity provider. And let's dive into the demo to sort of show you what I mean by that. So Salesforce can be what's called an identity provider. And what that actually means, so let's go and look at it. So I'm physically just going to type in identity provider into the setup. And you'll see that there's lots of things. There's lots of identity topics that Salesforce supports, right? You'll see single sign-on, you'll see OAuth. But what we're going to do in this demo is talk about how Salesforce can be an identity provider for other applications. So we're still talking about, integration and working with Salesforce and an external application. But in this case, we are talking about connecting Salesforce to, in our example, we're going to use G Suite, so Google. And we are going to set up Salesforce so that we can use our Salesforce credentials to log into G Suite. So I've already you need to enable Salesforce as an identity provider the first time you set this up in your maybe like Trailhead Playground or developer org. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing this in production. But so what you do is enable it, and it will allow you to set a couple of attributes. We don't need to dive too much into that now, but it essentially generates, remember how in the connected app, it generates like username, password almost with client ID and client secret. When you enable this, it sets up yet another piece of metadata that's sort of used to establish trust between systems, and that's a certificate. So we're going to use this auto-generated certificate that gets created once I create or I enable an identity provider. And I'm going to use that to help establish trust with Google, along with the consumer key and consumer secret. So in this one gets a little hairy. So I did set up some things beforehand, but I do want to show you sort of the flow from end to end. So I've enabled this. The system has automatically generated a certificate. So I'm going to download that certificate by clicking on this button. And it's going to download this fancy like XML or .cert document that has a lot of crazy information. I don't need to be able to read it. I just need to be able to hand it over to Google, because Google is going to store it similar to what we did on the 2 sides of setup in our previous example. We're going to do the same thing here. So I think I downloaded it, yeah. So I have my certificate. I am now going to go into my other external application. So similar to what we did with Heroku last time, we're going to go to G Suite. So I am going to go here. I'm in the admin console. So G Suite is like the paid version if you're an organization that's using Google. you end up using G Suite because it allows you to do lots of fancy things with security and roles and provisioning and things like that. So I'm in a G Suite account. You wouldn't see this if you just logged into your like Gmail account. But what I can do with G Suite is go into, and this is similar to setup in Salesforce, right? There's like all these different areas where I can do different types of things. So I am going to go in here and go to my configuration for single sign-on. So I just need to drop down one more level, I think. This is where I always forget how to do it. So security, and it is single sign-on. It's like I know Salesforce so well. G Suite, there we go. Apps, additional Google services, security. Totally makes sense. Apps, additional Google services. Hey, let's have it. There we go. It's the hardest part, finding where the Google settings are. Okay. And then security. Why is it doing this? Apps, additional Google services, 53 services. Okay. And third basics. Hold on, I'm just gonna pull this off screen. Any questions so far in what we're doing while I search for this Google setting? Has anyone done any of this? Have you created a mobile app or tested out like OpenID Connect and found it hard or interesting?
This is Benhani Hapte. I've done some of this in Trailhead, and I've done some of this with some of my other colleagues on some fun projects. It's a bit tricky. It took a little bit of finagling on our end, but somehow we managed to get it done.
Yeah, I think the most complex part is like making sure that you're storing the right information, because it's all about like just creating and sharing those keys almost. And sometimes it wants it in like a little bit of a different format than you want. So that's almost all of it. Okay, so let me just flip on single sign-on for Google.
I was actually working with Justice Sekakane. We had a really great conversation on how he built this connection with Microsoft Azure AD Connect using Salesforce and IDP. And then when someone logs into Salesforce from the office and they know that they have an account in Active Directory, they're then able to automatically log into Salesforce. So that was one thing that I've been looking at with him on.
Yeah, there's a cool thing, and it's another setting in connected apps that's called JIT. You might see it as JIT provisioning.
Yep.
Called just-in-time provisioning.
Yeah.
And that allows you to do some of that fancy stuff. Okay, so this is not loading.
Another fun one with Active Directory is also the Identity Connect for provisioning as well. I know that we were just looking at that for a customer and getting them set up there.
That's awesome. Why am I not seeing this? Let's see.
I also didn't realize, Susannah, it's Melissa Dees. Didn't realize that the communities do their identity, and the identity provider. I mean, that's I don't guess I've ever opened this particular setting in admin before. So to see all of our communities listed there as SAML metadata discovery endpoints.
Yes, that's a really good one. Let's see. I'm not seeing this. Just did this today. Security.
One thing that I found to be kind of a pain is getting that XML file for every single org over to the customer when it comes to the SSO and just working with them with those uploads, especially for the community versus the internal org, for the sandbox versus prod.
Yeah, a lot of people are moving more towards, instead of doing SAML, using OpenID Connect, which we didn't get into sort of like the meat of, but it's a little less hairy than doing SAML. Okay, cool. So I finally found the setting. That's the hardest part of working with G Suite, I found. So I am going to essentially just turn this on. I've pre-cooked some of the settings. So again, it's all about sharing like, hey, this is the org that I'm gonna work with. Here is, so I uploaded the certificate that we had downloaded to establish that trust. And I am going to turn it on. And I'm gonna click save. Cool. So now I'm going to go back to Salesforce, right? Because we need to do the other half. It's always about like setting up one half and then setting up the other half. So I'm going to go to service providers, and down here it kicks you into connected apps, because connected apps are sort of where all this good magic starts. Back in the day, it actually used a different, there was a way to actually configure service providers that was not connected apps, but I think they realized that connected apps are, like I did, connected apps are actually pretty cool. So why not do it there? Okay, so I have in my connected app area a Gmail SSO app that I've done a little bit of pre-baking on, but we'll walk through what it looks like. So we created it just like we did that with Dev's API, and we gave it a name, called it Gmail SSO. And we provided, or it provided, very similar to what we did in the previous step, it provided us with some information. So instead of turning on Oauth like we did with our previous app, we gave it some information. We said, here is where we want, when our single sign-on works, this is where we want to be redirected to after that authentication happens. That's called the start URL. We also provided some information that Google gave to us, because we're almost doing the reverse setting. We are providing information about the profile of that service provider and saving it in Salesforce, so that Salesforce can then use it, and Google sort of trusts this application on the other side, across the wire. So I've provided my start URL. I have said the piece of information that is going to be matched from my Salesforce org in my G Suite. So it's a little piece of information that I saved. It's essentially my Gmail email address. And I saved it on my user record in Salesforce so that I can create that connection for this demo. So we saved that in a field called Federation ID. And then what else? We said that the issuer of this particular this SSO connection that we're setting up is my Salesforce org. So we've enabled our settings on both sides. And now all that we need to do is make sure that we have, this is a step that we didn't have to do with our connected app, but we do have to do when we're using single sign-on with connected apps. We had to make sure that we enabled the right profiles to be able to do this. So I'm going to put my admin hat back on, and I am going to go in and manage my connected app. And like Melissa, you were saying, in this connected app, I have a lot more information. I have a lot of cool information about how to sort of test out. Some of these are for testing. So you can see if I wanted to sort of fake a login and make if I were doing an IDP initiated IDP initiated single sign-on, I can play around with how the different endpoints work, essentially. And I can also manage permissions. So I have given myself, as a system administrator, access to utilize this single sign-on setting of using Salesforce as an IDP with Google as an SP, or a service provider. So I have all these settings, and then the final step is to try to access my G Suite, right? I would expect that if this demo works, that when I try to access my G Suite, that I need to log out of both things first to remember to actually show you guys the magic. So I'm going to log out of here. I'm going to make sure I'm not logged in to, gonna screw me over anyway. Let me think for a second. No, I can log back in. Logged out of Salesforce. I am logging out of my G Suite account. Let's do it. And we are going to face the moment of truth when we see if this works like we thought it was going to work. Okay, so log out. Sign out of all accounts, sure. I'm going to now pretend I am trying to log in to Google. Cool. So, oops. Let me go ahead and paste my URL. It's just I'm trying to hit the mail itself, my Ladies Be Architects Gmail. So that's what you see down here. Oh, actually, this is the wrong thing copied to my keyboard. Okay, cool. And I am going to, cool. So I'm seeing a Salesforce login. That's good. That's a good start. Let's see if this is my right password. And I would expect to be directed to my Gmail, which it looks like it's working. Cool. So I have now used a connected app to, I feel like I'm doing magic tricks. I've used a connected app to authenticate into my G Suite account with my Salesforce credentials. Similar to what we looked at, and you can also see my email, similar to what we looked at previously, there are other two demos. If I now go in and look at my connected app, I will see the fact that, yes, I signed in. You can also see that from a cool, let me not confuse too many topics, but I get excited. So I can go to the connected app and look at the fact that I have an active connection with my, hold on, I can't type and talk at the same time. With my Gmail SSO connected app that I created. I could also kick myself out, so I have to go through the OAuth flow again. And then I can also see all the attempts. I can see that I successfully used single sign-on to connect to my Gmail. So let's see, I go here, and I could just make my screen smaller, but I think I go to view, because I am pretending to be an admin. I'm not managing it, or wait, I did it the wrong way. I always do. I'm pretending to be an admin, so I am managing my connected app. Let's see, manage connected apps. So I should see, I'm pretty small, I should see a Gmail SSO, and I do. So let me just, hold on, it's like, am I crazy? There we go. So I see my SSO, and now if I click into it, I'll be able to see the fact that where's my OAuth? Like, let's see. Where? This is what I always do. I always like forget my admin hat versus my dev hat and go in the wrong way. Okay, so I'm here. I'm going to go to manage. It is going to show me, oh, because I'm using, okay, sorry guys. So I'm using SAML. I'm not using OpenID Connect, so I'm not going to see that view OAuth usage. But if I go to my identity provider event log, what I am going to see is the fact that this works. So I'm going to see that today at this time PST, I used IDP initiated SAML to log into my Gmail account. And so I'm seeing that connection, and all of this was made possible because of the credentials and the trust that we established by using a connected app to act as the service provider in an IDP initiated single sign-on flow. So now we're going to go on to the most complex of the demos, and this is the one I'm actually the most excited about. So let me tee it up.
Question.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I was just thinking about, how you were setting up the connected app and all of that. And you said the magic word, your login flow. And I was like, now with the login flows that we can build into Salesforce, do you think of any reason these two things would collide?
So you are talking about login flows that happen after. So that's a great question. It's a confusing, I think it's confusing how Salesforce named login flows. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you can set up, I'm not logged in, I'll worry about that later. So you can set up something called a login flow that actually takes actions after the user is actually authenticated, but before they're spit into Salesforce. So you can do things like ask them to fill something out, or there's some pretty crazy use cases, but it's kind of the opposite of a single sign-on login flow, because that happens before the user is actually authenticated. A login flow in Salesforce login flow happens after they're physically authenticated, but before they're redirected to like the home page in Salesforce or whatever it is. So there would not be a collision because they're happening at different points in the login process. That makes sense.
Okay, because I've seen it where a large enterprise company utilize login flows for a variety of things, and I was thinking it was also with some of their connected apps where it authenticated, but then it forced you into this page to accept their legal terms and conditions and so forth before you got launched into Salesforce.
So that would be after you're physically authenticated with, like, your authorization server would have already validated the credentials, but the user doesn't get redirected to Salesforce until after they've accepted those terms. But that forget Salesforce in terms of just using single sign-on across applications. It's after the single sign-on has validated that the credentials are accurate. So if they had typed in, or if they had provided inaccurate single sign-on credentials in whatever part of the flow that they're doing, not Salesforce login flow, they wouldn't have even gotten to the screen that you're talking about. They would have gotten an error.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry to kind of go off.
No, it's a good.
I was trying to think, would these ever, kind of come back to back, or have some sort of overlap, or would they not come together?
Questions?
You can answer me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Cool. So final scenario. If you guys are still with me, I know this is like pretty heavy stuff, but I think it's really cool. So this is the scenario that did not make sense to me when I was reading about it on Trailhead. So the scenario is that you want to, and so we have to break down. I think we have to break out a couple of terms, especially if you're not familiar with API gateways, which probably some of you aren't intimately familiar with API gateways. I wasn't until I sort of went down this crazy rabbit hole. But what the scenario is, okay, so the scenario is that you are an API developer, and you have, in our fake scenario, we're going to say that we are using MuleSoft. We developed this awesome API that lets us query into some other system, not Salesforce. It queries into some order system, and we have a lot of people maybe that are using Salesforce in like a community, maybe a partner community, a set of people that would find this API super, super useful. So as an API developer, I am going to use the power of MuleSoft to publish this API out onto the MuleSoft Anypoint Exchange so that people can consume it. And in our scenario, we are going to do that, but then we're going to realize that, hey, we created this awesome API, but maybe we shouldn't allow every single person on the MuleSoft Anypoint Exchange to use it because it has sensitive information. We only want people that we are partners with, that we're working with, in the context of our consultancy or whatever. We only want certain people to be authorized to use this particular API in their projects. So the way that you do that is through something called an API gateway. It's this sort of layer that stands between the API that you've built and the consumer who might be trying to use the API in their own application. And it allows you to enforce policies and say, hey, I only want people to hit my API like once a minute because I'm worried about traffic or something. Or it says, I only want people with special credentials to access my API because it's sensitive. And in this scenario, we're sort of coming full circle. We're going to use connected apps and those secret consumer key and consumer secret to allow people to access my API. Okay. So let's go into MuleSoft. This is what I think is pretty cool. I had not done a ton of MuleSoft work until I went down this crazy rabbit hole of trying to like understand how this would actually work in the real world. So I'm gonna log into MuleSoft, and yes, this is my right account. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at that, like what an API, what the API might look like, and also how MuleSoft allows you to set those policies and act as an API gateway. For any of you who are familiar with MuleSoft, and maybe haven't used their API gateway functionality, it's sort of baked in when you publish something on the Anypoint Exchange. But it's technically, if you're trying to do this at home afterwards, the API gateway is called Cloud Hub. That's how they branded it a while ago, but it's all sort of baked into the same platform. I found that super confusing when I was trying to Google, like, what the hell is, or what the heck, sorry, excuse my language, what the heck is an API gateway, and like, how do I play around with it? So all of that aside, so I'm in MuleSoft, so I am going to play the role of the API developer for a second. So I'm in MuleSoft, and I'm going to go to the Design Center. So in MuleSoft, where you develop your APIs is in this module called the Design Center. And again, I've pre-baked some stuff because we're doing a lot of different scenarios, but I have built out this API called the Witness API that is going to pull back information from my fictional contact database. And I've developed it. I think it's really cool. So you can see I've hard-coded some things in here as a sort of a mock-up, but it does actually call out to an external system, to a SQL database. But we essentially have, and I'm not going to go too far into this MuleSoft bit, even though I want to, because I'm very interested in it right now. But I have developed this API using something called RAML, which is the REST API management language, or the RESTful API management language. And it allows you to sort of define the shape of your API. So what are the different pieces of information that you can query for, and what sorts of operations can you do with your API? So I've done all that work. I've developed it, and I want to share it out with the world. So once I share this API out with the world, it goes into a place in MuleSoft called the Anypoint Exchange. And there people can go and access it and download it and work with it and bake it into their own applications. So this is the Exchange. Right now, we're in the place in the scenario where I just built this, I shared it out, and I thought it was a really good idea. So right now, I have it running. I have this API running. And to see your APIs that are running in MuleSoft, you go to something called the Runtime Manager. So I can hop in here, and I can see that I have my API running, and I can see what's called the endpoint, or where I need to call, like that URL I need to hit in order to get information back. So I have my Runtime Manager. I can see that this WitDevs API is running. It's running on Cloud Hub, which is our API gateway. And I can, I can click into it. I'm trying to remember yes. So I can click into it, or I can sort of preview it. And I can see that this is the API URL where I can essentially hit in my, either with my code, or I'm going to use an application called Postman, where it's essentially a mocking service where I can query different endpoints and get information back for different applications. If you have not played around with Postman, it's pretty standard for like integration developers, API developers, and it's really powerful. So I'm using it right here to just call out to that particular API that I created. And it's this WitDevs US E2 Cloud Hub. I don't know why I copied it, but I didn't need to. And you need to append some attributes to the end of the URL in order to hit the right API. So in our demo, case, we're just adding API/contacts. This would be different if you developed a real life application, but for our demo, this is the URL we need to hit in order to get back information. So I have not yet secured my API, so I'm going to click send, and I'm going to expect, see if it works. I'm going to expect to get back information. So I'm going to get back this fictional list of contacts that are coming from the server that's not Salesforce. And in our, again, we're in our theoretical situation. I want anyone who's part of my partner community in Salesforce to be able to use this API too and get at this information, but no one else. I don't want just like random person that's not working with me to get my contact information. So I want to, going back to our scenario, I want to be able to secure it with Salesforce. And the way to do that, get out of Postman, is to leverage connected apps. Why is this like all of a sudden taking over my screen? Okay. No? Okay, cool. There we go. Multiple monitor joys. We can do it, I swear. I'm just going to close out of Postman. Okay, cool. So I'm back in MuleSoft. I am now going to secure my API. And there's a couple of steps that I need to do on both sides. So again, like moral of working with connected apps, the moral of tonight's presentation is like when you're doing these integrations, there's steps you need to take on both sides in order to set up that secure communication. So we are going to protect our API using the protocol that we used in our first demo. So we really are coming full circle. Protocol called OpenID Connect. And this is going to do something really cool. And I am going to show it to you now. So I'm going to go back to my Salesforce org. Let me find it here. Why am I in Classic all of a sudden? Okay, who knows? So I am going to go to Connected Apps because I have pre-baked a little bit of this. And I'm going to go to a connected app that I defined. Again, I just gave it a wacky name because I could. I called it the API Gateway Connected App. So I created this for a couple of reasons. Here. So I created it to, I always go to the wrong place every single time. So I created it to get that consumer key and the consumer secret. That's, at the end of the day, that's like the point of using connected apps for a lot of these integration use cases. So I am going to click into my connected app and I'm going to see that information, so the secret credentials. And I'm going to use these to connect the two systems together and to secure them. So I have my consumer secret over here. I have my consumer key. Great, great, great. I have my callback URL, which again is that thing that we sort of just pass through to make sure that the information is going back to the right place. I have selected a whole bunch of scopes. I probably wouldn't, you would not do this in the real world, but I did it in my quick and dirty demo. And then I'm going to highlight a new piece of connected apps in this final demo, which is this little section called Initial Access Token for Dynamic Client Registration, which is a mouthful. Because what we're going to do is allow, so back to sort of like the business use case of the scenario, I'm securing this API, but I don't necessarily know like the login, like the username and password, or even the name of every single person that might end up using it. I just want people that are a part of a certain group to be able to use it. So I am going to do this wacky thing called dynamic client registration that allows MuleSoft to dynamically create a new connected app in my org so that other external folks who happen to have a login to my org, so again, I think a partner community is probably like the best use case or the best fictional use case to make it pretty clear and not confusing. But anyone in my partner community, they can dynamically register to use my API. And I want to keep track of all those people who are using it and maybe say, oh, I'm going to block this partner because they're no longer a part of my, my my circle or whatever it is. So I'm going to use all of that to say, I'm going to use these two credentials and this little secret here, this initial access token, to allow clients or partners that are, I hate using the word partners, clients who are people that are going to consume my API to gain access to it. So I know that sounds like crazily confusing. So let me just show you what it looks like. So I have these three pieces of information, like secret pieces of information. I am going to now flip back to my Anypoint Management Center. And I am going to do kind of similar to what we did in Google, except I know where this setting is. I am going to go to Access Management and set up some pre-configured values so that MuleSoft knows that this Salesforce org is the one that can authorize people who are trying to use this API. So to do that, I go to a place in MuleSoft called External Identity. It probably sounds familiar. We're not doing SAML and identity management stuff, but we're doing client management. So I'm going to go in here and edit this. I did already sort of copy and paste some of these values, but I essentially am saying that this Salesforce org is the issuer, not any Salesforce org. So unlike the previous case, the issuer is my domain, my particular domain. I am saying where or what endpoint the client would need to hit. So again, if we're thinking about using like a mocking service like Postman, the client would hit this particular endpoint to dynamically create a client in my org, in my Salesforce org, so that they can use that client consumer key and consumer secret to interact with my API. That's sort of the end game, to have each client have their own consumer secret and consumer key. I pasted in this authorization header is where the access, that initial access token goes. So it's like another level of secret saying like, yep, I am validating that I trust this person who's trying to gain trust with me as a Salesforce entity or as a Salesforce authorization server. And then I'm also pasting in the consumer key and consumer secret too. So again, that's pretty standard setup that happens on both sides. And then I'm pasting in some other endpoints that are required just by this protocol. So you can see that there's like an authorize endpoint. I need to be able to provide to MuleSoft to say, hey, if you're authorizing, go here. If you are trying to get a token, go here. If you were trying to validate that token, that's what introspect means. If you see that written, introspecting a token means to allow, to ask Salesforce to take a token and then look inside itself and say, hey, yes, I recognize this token. It is a token that I know and I trust that I gave it to you. It's essentially what introspect means. So I have set up copied and pasted all these values, right, from our connected app into MuleSoft. And I saved it. I don't need to resave it, but I don't want to discard it. I'm going to then hop out and now go to our API because we haven't yet. So we set up all that setting, right? But we didn't yet tell our WithDevs API that other people can't access it. It's still wide open to the public. So I'm going to hop into our WithDevs API and go to something pretty cool. I was hopping in the wrong places. So I am going to my runtime manager, API manager. So I'm going to my API manager and setting the policies for this particular API. So I'm going to click in here. I'm going to do this. The thing I don't love about MuleSoft, some of like the things that are clickable aren't necessarily straightforward. So I can see lots of cool things I won't go into, but I can see like all the different requests and people that are accessing my API. But I can also do something that we mentioned at the outset of this, which is create policies. And policies are essentially, only allowing a certain amount of calls into my API in a certain amount of time. It's called rate limiting, if you're interested. But what we're going to do, the policy that we are going to apply right now is, it's like super, super grayed out. So let me turn it on, but it's called the OpenID Connect Access Token Enforcement Policy. And this is how we're going to lock down the access to our API. So I'm going to click Action Enable, and then we'll look at it together. But it is essentially, let's see, view my detail. No, not that. Oh, that's all, yeah. Okay, so in here, because I already did all the setup, there's really not much here. So it's saying we're applying the OpenID Connect Access Token Enforcement Policy that I had to do some setup in my RAML file. So again, in my API definition file to hook it all together. But it's essentially saying that I am just applying this policy to lock down all of the methods and all of the resources that my API provides to people. So I have applied this policy, and it looks like it is active. Cool. And sometimes it takes a second to work. But what I'm going to do to validate that it has officially been locked down is go back and open up Postman. Let's see. Actually doing pretty good on time. So I'm opening up Postman, and I'm going to try to hit that API endpoint that we hit earlier where we got back the contacts. And what I would expect to happen if the policy is turned on and it's working is that I would get an error message because I'm not authenticated. I haven't provided any information to prove who I am yet. I'm literally just hitting this API. So I'm going to refresh. Sometimes it needs a little nudge. And I am going to hit this same endpoint. So let's do it. Let's see. Yay. Okay, so where I previously got contact information, I now see an error that I don't have the right token, like I don't have the right secret password to allow me access to this particular API. Cool. So in the last 10 minutes, we're going to show you how it all sort of comes together. I get out of stupid Postman that's like taking over my life over here. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. I'm just going to, put it, or wait, new window? No. That's interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna quit it. Yeah, I'm just gonna quit. I don't know what's happening with the little wacky bug over there, but okay, cool. So I've turned on my policy. I'm now going to put on the hat of my partner who wants to use this super awesome API that I developed. So I'm someone just looking out on the MuleSoft Anypoint exchange, and I'm searching for an API, and I found this awesome WitDevs API. This is great. I can see that it has like a couple of methods. It has a get method, and that it has some security on it too. I can see, okay, there's an OAuth policy that is on it. I see these same endpoints, which is okay, fine. But what I'm going to do as a user is actually request access. This is all about access. I'm going to request access to this API, and I'm going to prove that I should be able to access it with my Salesforce credentials. So I'm going to go in and request access to this API, the instance that I'm running, and I'm going to create a new application that I'm going to use this API with. So I'm going to enter my application name. I'm going to say WitDevs demo. Time is the name of my application. I'm going to just give it a URL. This is optional. I'm then going to tell this particular API that I'm going to provide. I'm going to prove that I am who I am and kick off the authorization flow using something called an authorization code grant as opposed to a different type of grant. This is sort of that part where I'm not using a password and username. I'm using something a little more secure. And then I'm going to again, provide that sort of like pass-through value that doesn't allow people to hack me. It's the callback URL or redirect URL. I think yeah, it has to be HTTPS. And then I think that's all I have to fill out. Yeah, so this should work. Let's see. So I'm asking for access. I registered all like the parameters that I put in, okay. And now I'm just gonna click the blue button and request access. And behind the scenes, our API gateway is calling out to Salesforce and asking for permission via the connected app that we originally set up. And you can see that it has now given back to us a client ID and client secret just for this particular application. And why that is cool is because it provides another layer of security, so that I don't just have one client secret and key that I'm sharing with all of my consumers. My consumers are able to set up their own instance of what is frankly a connected app in my Salesforce org. So let's very quickly, because I know we're almost out of time, go and look at it, and we can see that it has dynamically, and this is why it's dynamic registration, through MuleSoft. I just created a connected app in my org, and it generated magically its own connected ID or consumer ID and consumer key. So if I go to connected app usage, I am now going to see, hopefully, my WitDevs demo time. WitDevs web. I don't see it. Let's see. Let's refresh. I should see my WitDevs demo time application, because I think that's what I called it. Where is it? Let's see it. Let's see. So I see that it was created. Interesting. So let's try out our API. So I'm going to grab these two new, so like the whole point of this is to use our API, right? So I'm going to grab the client secret and client ID that got dynamically created and go back to Postman. That keeps wanting to take over my screen, and see if we have the right credentials to access the application. Oh, I know why it's not showing up here. It's because we haven't actually used the credentials yet. So if I go to my app manager, I am going to show you. I will see my WitDevs demo time here, but I don't see it in my Oauth usage yet because I haven't used it. I haven't used this connected app. So I'm going to view it just to show you. Like I could see the consumer key and consumer secret in MuleSoft, but I can also see it here. And I'm just going to use these values to call into my API. Where is Postman? There it is. See if we can have it like be a normal app. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back to this get that I was doing previously. I am going to very quickly set up authorization here because I need to send my secret. I need to generate a secret token to be able to access my resources. So I'm going to use Postman to help me out with that really fast. So WitDevs demo time is going to be the name of the token that I'm generating. All of this can stay the same. These were just our setup things that we set up in MuleSoft, right? But the only two things we need to change are our consumer key, aka client ID, and client secret, which I'm just revealing over here in my connected app on my other screen. Okay, good. And there we go. I'm asking for a scope. So I'm asking for a subset of rights. If I hadn't granted them in my connected app, I would get an error when I try and do this. And then I'm going to request a token. And this is sort of doing some of that fancy magic on the backside like our Heroku app was doing in the first example. I am going to remember my password somewhere. Let's think. I pasted it here. Okay, cool. And 2 minutes, awesome. So I am authenticating and authorizing my API or my app that my API developer has set up. I'm allowing it. And now I have created a token, so I can see this access token that I can now use to call my API, hopefully. So let's see. I am using my WitDevs demo time token. I'm going to call this API, and I would assume that I'm going to get back that original list of contacts that I got before it was secured. So I'm going to click send. I might have to refresh. I might get an error now that I'm thinking about it. Oh, but I got it. So I got back my secure, or I've effectively secured my API via connected app. I can now access it in my own super secret connected app that was dynamically created. And if I wanted to view my Oauth app usage, I would now see it here in my usage. So with Dev's demo time. Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour, I know, and I know we're right at time. Let me just hop back into my slides and wrap this up quickly. So what did we do? We went through sort of 4 whirlwind demos. We looked at ways to use connected apps with, we used ways to use connected apps as an admin, as a developer, to secure different types of applications, and to do some pretty fancy stuff with MuleSoft. And there are luckily lots of resources out there to do similar things if you're interested in building out some of these use cases. The first one that we did is actually a project in Trailhead. So if you're just starting out but you want to play around, this build a connected app for API integration is pretty easy to follow. So I definitely recommend this. And then there's also a very good play-by-play if you're maybe more advanced and looking to like really grasp some of like the bigger crazy concepts. This play-by-play is very good. And there's also an identity community group, which I did not know about until like a month ago, with the PMs for Salesforce identity. So this is the place to go if you have like some crazy complex questions and you need an answer from the definitive Salesforce identity experts. They are in there. And with that, thank you.
Do you have experience connecting apps with Salesforce? What advice would you give? What would you like to see in future videos? Comment below. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you've made it to this point, we want to take an opportunity to say thank you. And since you stayed with us, here's a bonus. You can use connected apps to define which security protocol your Canvas app uses, such as signed in request or OAuth. Thank you for spending time with us. Make sure you like this video. It helps a lot. Click subscribe and on the notification bell so you never miss another video. We also handpick these videos, which we recommend you watch next. You can talk to us on Instagram, Twitter, and on our website at 100daysoftrailhead.com, all of which are listed below. Thank you for learning with us, and we'll see you back tomorrow.